Montana Territory, 1876. Garrett Young pulled his coat tighter as the wind whipped across the plains, carrying the unmistakable scent of an approaching storm. The dark clouds gathering on the horizon promised more than just a passing shower. At 25, he had seen enough Montana storms to know this one would be fierce. "Easy, Maverick," he murmured to his horse, patting the nervous animal's neck. "We will find shelter before it hits." Garrett had spent the last 7 years working ranches across the territory, never staying in one place too long. The way he saw it, roots only gave a man something to lose. His father had built a life in Kansas, only to have it ripped away by raiders during the war, leaving 16-year-old Garrett alone to make his way in a brutal world. The lesson had been clear: attachments were dangerous. Better to keep moving, rely on no one but yourself, and never let anyone rely on you. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Garrett spotted smoke rising from a chimney in the distance, a small homestead nestled against the foothills. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a boom of thunder that made Maverick dance nervously beneath him. As he approached the property, he noticed something wrong. A woman was struggling with a panicking horse, trying to lead it toward a barn as the wind threatened to tear her dress from her body. The frightened animal reared up, nearly trampling her. Garrett spurred Maverick forward without hesitation. He reached them just as another crack of thunder sent the horse bolting, dragging the woman several feet before she lost her grip on the reins and fell hard to the ground. "Stay down," Garrett called as he galloped past, giving chase to the runaway horse. He caught up within moments, grabbing the trailing reins and gradually slowing the terrified animal. By the time he returned, leading both horses, the woman had struggled to her feet. She was young, no more than 20, with rain-soaked golden hair plastered to her face and a simple blue dress now mud-splattered and torn at the hem. "Thank you," she shouted over the howling wind. "The barn this way." Inside the barn, they worked quickly to secure the horses. The woman moved with practiced efficiency despite her small frame and the obvious pain from her fall. Once the animals were settled, she turned to him, pushing wet strands of hair from her face. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Young, Garrett Young." "Marian Ross," she replied, extending a slender hand, "or Mrs. Ross, I suppose, though there has not been a Mr. Ross for nearly 8 months now." Her blue eyes held a depth of sadness that seemed too heavy for someone so young, but her handshake was firm. Garrett noticed a fresh scrape along her forearm. "You are hurt." "It is nothing," she dismissed, though she winced slightly. "Please, the house is warmer, you must get dry before you catch your death." The small cabin was neat but sparse, with a fire burning in the hearth. As Marian lit additional lamps, Garrett took in the details: a carefully mended quilt on the single bed, a shelf of books, and a framed photograph of a stern-faced man in Union Army uniform. "My husband Thomas," she explained, following his gaze, "survived 3 years of war only to be taken by fever last winter." "I am sorry." "As was I," she busied herself stoking the fire. "But sorrow does not plant fields or mend fences. Please remove your wet coat." While Marian prepared coffee, Garrett found himself watching her quiet efficiency. She could not be more than 20 years old, yet she moved with the determined resilience of someone who had already faced more than her share of hardship. "The storm looks to last through the night," she observed, handing him a steaming cup. "You are welcome to stay in the barn. I cannot offer you the house, being alone and all." "I understand, ma'am. The barn will be fine." "Most would have ridden past," she said suddenly. "Plenty have, even in fair weather." "You needed help." "Yes, I did." Something in her direct gaze made him uncomfortable, a vulnerability that asked for nothing yet somehow demanded acknowledgement. Garrett shifted his weight. "Where is your nearest neighbor?" "The miller's about 5 miles east." Lightning illuminated the window as thunder rattled the glass. "No one close enough to help with a spooked horse during a storm." "You cannot manage this place alone," he said before he could stop himself. Her chin lifted slightly. "I have been doing exactly that for 8 months, Mr. Young." Garrett recognized his mistake immediately. "I meant no offense." "None taken," she replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But I would rather struggle alone than be pitied." The silence that followed was broken only by the howling wind and the crackle of the fire. Garrett finished his coffee, feeling strangely chastened. "The barn has a good roof," Marian finally said, her voice softer. "There are dry blankets in the chest by the door." "Thank you, Mrs. Ross." "Marian," she corrected him. "Out here formality seems like wasted breath." As Garrett settled into the barn that night, listening to the storm rage outside, he found himself thinking about the young widow. Her determination impressed him, but he knew better than most how quickly the frontier could crush even the strongest spirit. By morning, he told himself he would be on his way and she would return to her solitary struggle. That was the way of things out west, everyone alone against the elements, fighting their own battles. It was the safest way, the only way, but when morning came, the storm had left chaos in its wake. A massive oak had fallen across the corral fence, and 2 sections of roofing had been torn from the barn. Garrett found Marian already outside, surveying the damage with a grim expression. "I can help with this before I go," he offered, approaching her. She turned, surprise briefly crossing her features. "I would appreciate that, though I cannot pay you." "I am not asking for payment." They worked side by side throughout the day, securing the barn roof, clearing debris, and beginning repairs on the corral. Marian worked as hard as any ranch hand he had known, never complaining despite the blisters forming on her small hands. As evening approached, she insisted he stay for supper. "It is the least I can do." Over a simple meal of rabbit stew, Garrett learned that Marian had come west with Thomas 3 years earlier, full of dreams about building a life in the new territory. They had just begun to make the homestead profitable when illness took him. "Everyone expected me to sell and move back east," she said, breaking a piece of cornbread. "My parents have written countless letters begging me to return to Pennsylvania." "Why stay?" Garrett asked. Her eyes met his across the table. "Because this is mine, our dream. Thomas and I built every inch of this place together. I will not abandon it simply because the work has become harder." Something in her quiet determination resonated with Garrett, though he could not explain why. Her choice to remain alone in such a harsh place seemed both foolish and admirable. "You mentioned helping through tomorrow," she said, changing the subject. "The storm has put me behind on everything." "I can stay another day," Garrett found himself saying, though he had planned to leave at first light. One day stretched into 3 as they worked to restore the homestead. Garrett told himself he was simply being decent. The storm had caused considerable damage, and Marian clearly needed the help. But each evening, as they sat by the fire talking, he found himself sharing pieces of his past that he had never spoken of to anyone: his father's death, his years of drifting, the loneliness of the trail. On the 4th morning, as Garrett saddled Maverick, preparing to finally continue on his way, Marian approached with a small package wrapped in cloth. "Food for your journey," she explained. "And my thanks." "You do not need to thank me." "Yes, I do." She looked up at him, the morning sun catching in her golden hair. "Few strangers would have helped as you did." "I should have done more," he admitted, realizing he was reluctant to leave. "The north field still needs clearing, and that well pump is barely working." Marian studied him for a moment. "I have a proposition, Mr. Young." "Garrett," he corrected. "Garrett," she acknowledged with the hint of a smile. "I need help with this place more than I care to admit. Winter will be here before long, and I cannot prepare alone." He waited, sensing what was coming. "I can offer room and board plus a small wage once we sell the harvest. Stay through winter, help me get this place back on its feet." Every instinct told Garrett to refuse. Staying meant putting down temporary roots, forming connections that would only lead to pain when they inevitably ended. And yet the thought of riding away left him with an unexpected hollow feeling. "I am not much for settling," he said finally. "I am not asking you to settle," she replied evenly, "just to stay until spring. After that, you can continue on your way with no obligations." Garrett looked around at the small homestead. It needed work, a lot of it, but it had potential. And something about Marian's quiet determination made him want to see her succeed. "Until spring," he agreed, surprising himself. The days grew shorter as summer faded into autumn. Garrett and Marian fell into a rhythm of work, repairing what the storm had damaged and preparing for the coming winter. They maintained a careful distance. He slept in a renovated section of the barn, and she kept to the cabin, but their easy partnership gradually developed into something like friendship. Garrett found himself noticing things about Marian, the way she hummed while kneading bread, how she always paused her work to watch the sunset, the determination in her eyes when she tackled a particularly difficult task. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, combining gentleness with a steel-like resolve that continually surprised him. In late September, they took the harvest to the nearest town, returning with supplies and enough money to see them through winter with a small surplus. That night they celebrated with a special supper. To a successful harvest, Marian raised her cup, her cheeks flushed with pride, and to the most stubborn widow in Montana Territory, Garrett added with a rare smile. "I prefer determined," she laughed, the sound warming the small cabin. "You have done well here," he said more seriously. "Most would have given up months ago." Not without a fight, her expression grew thoughtful. "You know, when Thomas died, I thought my life was over, everything we had planned gone in an instant, but then I realized that giving up would mean losing him twice, first his presence, then his dream." "He would be proud," Garrett said softly. Marian looked away, blinking rapidly. "I hope so." The first snow came early that year, coating the landscape in white overnight. Winter settled over the homestead, forcing them indoors except for necessary chores. The close quarters might have been awkward, but instead they found a comfortable routine. During the day they worked on indoor projects, Garrett crafting furniture and tools while Marian sewed, preserved food, and kept meticulous records of their supplies. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking or reading from Marian's small collection of books. It was during these quiet evenings that Garrett began to recognize a dangerous shift in his feelings. Watching Marian across the firelight, her golden hair glowing and her eyes animated as she read aloud, he found himself imagining a different life, one with permanence, with connection with her. The realization troubled him deeply. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability inevitably led to pain. He had sworn never to put down roots, never to give anyone the power to hurt him as his father's death had hurt him. Yet here he was, dreaming of something he had long ago decided was impossible. One snowy evening in December, as Marian read from a volume of Tennyson, Garrett abruptly stood. "I should check on the animals," he muttered, though he had done so just an hour earlier. Marian looked up, surprise evident on her face. "It is freezing out there." "Won't take long." He grabbed his coat and escaped into the bitter cold, needing distance from the warmth of her presence. In the barn, surrounded by the familiar smells of hay and horses, Garrett tried to regain his equilibrium. This arrangement had been a mistake. He was getting too comfortable, forgetting the lessons life had taught him. Come spring, he would ride away as planned. This was temporary, it had to be. When he returned to the cabin, Marian was waiting, her expression concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Fine," he replied shortly. "Just restless." She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Winter does that, makes us feel trapped." Yes, though it wasn't winter that made him feel trapped, it was his own conflicted emotions. "You are thinking of leaving when the snow clears," she said, her perceptiveness catching him off guard. "We agreed until spring." "We did," her voice was carefully neutral, "and I expect you to honor that. But afterward you are free to go." "That was always the plan." Marian nodded again, returning to her book, but something had changed in the atmosphere between them, a new awareness, a tension that hadn't existed before. Christmas came, bringing with it unexpected warmth despite the frigid temperatures outside. Marian surprised Garrett with a new woolen scarf she had knitted secretly during the long evenings. He had managed to carve her a small wooden box with delicate floral patterns, perfect for storing her sewing notions. "It is beautiful," she whispered, tracing the carvings with her fingertips. "Not much of a gift," he said, embarrassed by her evident pleasure. "It is perfect." Her eyes met his. "Thank you, Garrett." Something passed between them in that moment, something that made his heart beat faster and warned him simultaneously of danger. January brought brutal cold and a blizzard that lasted 3 days, confining them completely to the cabin. By the second day, Garrett was climbing the walls, unused to such confinement. Marian, sensing his restlessness, suggested teaching him to play checkers with a set Thomas had made. "I warn you," she said as they set up the pieces, "I rarely lose." "Is that a challenge, Mrs.?" Ross, he asked, the formality a teasing reminder of their first meeting. Indeed it is, Mr. Young. The game provided welcome distraction, and Marian proved true to her word, defeating him soundly 3 times in succession. You are ruthless, Garrett accused after his third defeat. I prefer strategic, she laughed, echoing their earlier conversation about her determination. Garrett found himself laughing with her, the sound rusty from disuse. When had he last laughed like this? He could not remember. As the evening wore on, Marian told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas at a church social when she was 17, about their decision to seek a new life in the West despite her parents' objections. We were so naive, she said softly. We thought love would conquer every hardship. And did it not? Garrett asked. Her smile turned sad. It helped. But love alone cannot stop disease or mend a broken roof or bring in a harvest. Out here, you need more than feelings to survive. Yet you stayed, even after he was gone. Yes, she looked into the fire. At first because I was too stubborn to admit defeat, then because I discovered something about myself. What was that? That I am stronger than I ever knew, that I can build a life on my own terms. Her eyes returned to his. Though I will admit having helped these past months has been nice. The word seemed inadequate for what had grown between them, but Garrett only nodded, unwilling to acknowledge the implications of her statement. When the blizzard finally broke, they emerged to find snow piled nearly to the cabin windows. It took 2 days to dig paths to the barn and well. Working side by side in the crisp, bright aftermath of the storm, Garrett found himself watching Marian more than he should, the flush in her cheeks from exertion, the determination in her movements, the occasional smile she sent his way. That night, exhausted from their labors, they sat close by the fire. Marian was mending a tear in one of his shirts while Garrett whittled at a piece of pine. What will you do? She asked suddenly. When spring comes and you move on. The question startled him. He had been so focused on their daily life together that he had almost stopped thinking about leaving. The same as before, I suppose, find work at different ranches. Keep moving. And is that what you want? Her needle paused, hovering above the fabric. It is what I know, he answered, avoiding her gaze. That is not the same thing. No, it wasn't. But admitting what he actually wanted seemed too dangerous for both of them. What about you? He countered. Will you stay here alone indefinitely? Marian resumed her stitching. I do not know. I promised myself I would make it through 1 full year on my own before deciding. And when is that year up? April 15th. She tied off her thread and cut it. Thomas died last April 15th. April 15th, just a few weeks after the spring they had agreed upon as the end of their arrangement. The realization hit Garrett with unexpected force. He would be gone before she reached that milestone. Perhaps you should consider selling, he suggested, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. This place is too much for one person. She looked up sharply. Is that truly what you think I should do? No, it wasn't, but suggesting she stay, that they might have a future together, went against everything he had believed about himself for years. I think you should do whatever brings you peace, he said finally. Peace, she repeated softly. I am not sure such a thing exists out here. February brought a brief thaw, allowing them to venture into town for supplies. The small settlement was buzzing with news. A gang of outlaws had been raiding isolated homesteads to the north. 3 farms hit in the last month, the storekeeper told them as he filled their order. Danson Place got it worst. Took everything of value and burned the barn when they left. Garrett exchanged a concerned look with Marian. How many in the gang? 4 or 5 from what I hear, led by a man called Reeves. Mean piece of work with a reputation from Kansas to Montana. The name sent a chill through Garrett. Jack Reeves had been among the raiders who attacked his father's farm years ago. He had recognized the man's face as he fled, carrying that memory like a burning coal ever since. You all right, son? The storekeeper asked, noticing Garrett's expression. Fine, he managed. Just concerned about these raids. On the ride back to the homestead, Marian sensed his distraction. You know this Reeves person, don't you? There was no point denying it. He was part of the group that killed my father. I was 16. Marian's eyes widened. Garrett, I am so sorry. It was a long time ago. Not long enough from the look on your face. She was right. Learning that Reeves was operating in the territory had awakened something dark and vengeful that Garrett had carried inside him for years, the reason he had never allowed himself to form attachments or build a life. "We should be careful," he said, changing the subject. "Keep the rifle loaded and the doors barred at night." Marian studied his profile. "You are worried they might come to our place." "Your place," he corrected automatically. "And yes, isolated homesteads are easy targets." "Our place," she said quietly but firmly, "for now at least." The correction warmed something in him even as it heightened his anxiety. Having something to lose made him vulnerable, exactly what he had always avoided. Over the next weeks, Garrett found himself increasingly on edge, constantly checking the horizon for riders and insisting that Marian never venture far from the cabin alone. His protective behavior both touched and frustrated her. "We cannot live in fear," she told him one evening after he had insisted on bringing in firewood that she normally collected herself. "It is not fear. It is caution." "It is becoming a prison," she countered, "and I did not survive this long by hiding." Her words stung because they contained truth, but the thought of Reeves and his men finding the homestead, finding her, filled Garrett with a dread he could barely contain. March arrived with warming temperatures and melting snow. As the landscape gradually emerged from winter's grip, Garrett found himself counting the days until their arrangement would end. Part of him longed to stay to build something permanent with Marian, but another part, the part shaped by loss and hardened by years of solitude, insisted that leaving was the only safe option. The decision was made for him on a clear, cold morning in mid-March. Garrett was repairing a section of fencing when he spotted riders approaching, 4 men moving with deliberate purpose toward the homestead. Even at a distance, he recognized the lead rider's distinctive posture: Reeves. Heart-pounding, Garrett dropped his tools and ran for the cabin where Marian was baking bread. "Riders coming," he said urgently. "4 of them. I think it is Reeves and his gang." Marian's face paled, but she moved with swift efficiency, grabbing the rifle from above the door. "How long do we have?" "Minutes, 5 at most." Garrett took the rifle from her hands. "Take what you can and go out the back. There is a hollow in the creek bed about a quarter-mile east. Hide there." "I am not leaving you alone to face 4 armed men," she protested. "Marian, please," he gripped her shoulders. "I cannot protect you and fight them at the same time." "This is my home," she insisted, her blue eyes flashing. "I will not be driven from it by thieves." Garrett wanted to shake her, to force her to understand the danger, but there was no time. The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. "Then stay behind me and do exactly as I say." They positioned themselves at the front window, Garrett with the rifle and Marian with Thomas's old revolver. As the riders approached the cabin, Garrett recognized Jack Reeves immediately, older and grayer than the man in his memories, but unmistakable with his scarred face and cold eyes. "That is far enough," Garrett called out when the men were within hearing distance. "State your business." Reeves reined in his horse, studying the cabin with calculating eyes. "Just passing through, friend. Looking for water and maybe a hot meal if you can spare it." "Creek is a mile west," Garrett replied evenly. "Help yourself, we have nothing to spare here." A slow smile spread across Reeves's weathered face. "Now that is not very neighborly." His gaze shifted, noticing Marian partially visible behind Garrett. "Especially when you have such pleasant company." Garrett felt a cold fury building inside him. "Move on, Reeves, now." The outlaw's eyes narrowed at the use of his name. "Do I know you, boy?" "You knew my father, Jacob Young. Kansas, 1867. You and your friends raided our farm, killed him." Recognition dawned slowly on Reeves's face, followed by a contemptuous smile. "Jacob Young. Been a long time since I heard that name." He looked Garrett up and down. "You were that skinny kid hiding in the barn, weren't you? Thought you looked familiar." Marian's hand touched Garrett's back briefly, a silent reminder to stay calm. "I am telling you one last time to move on," Garrett said, his voice deadly quiet. Reeves laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the yard. "Or what? You will shoot all 4 of us." He glanced at his companions. "Boys, I think we found ourselves some entertainment for the day." Everything happened at once. Reeves reached for his gun as his men spread out. Garrett fired, the rifle shot striking Reeves's shoulder and knocking him from his saddle. The other outlaws returned fire, bullets splintering the cabin's wooden walls. "Get down!" Garrett pushed Marian to the floor as he reloaded. "They are trying to circle around back," she warned, peering through a crack in the wall. Garrett cursed under his breath. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Even with Reeves wounded, the odds were grim. "When I give the word, run for the barn," he told Marian. "There is a trapdoor in the floor of the grain room, storage space underneath. Hide there." "Not without you," she insisted. "I will follow, but one of us needs to draw their fire while the other escapes." Marian's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, understanding the logic. "Be careful." Garrett moved to the back window, rifle ready. "Now," he shouted, firing rapidly at the outlaws approaching from the side of the cabin. Marian ran, skirts gathered, sprinting across the open space toward the barn. Garrett continued firing, providing cover until she disappeared inside, then he prepared to make his own dash. Before he could move, the cabin door burst open. One of Reeves's men stood there, pistol raised. Garrett turned, but not quickly enough. The gun fired and searing pain tore through his side. He staggered, returning fire instinctively. The outlaw fell, but Garrett knew he was in trouble. Blood soaked his shirt as he stumbled toward the back door. Outside, he could hear Reeves shouting orders to the remaining men. The barn was 30 yards away, might as well be 30 miles in his condition. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Garrett forced himself forward. He had to reach Marian to warn her. He made it halfway across the yard before his legs gave out. As he fell to his knees, he saw Reeves limping toward him, gun drawn. "Should have stayed hidden, boy," the outlaw sneered. "Just like you did when your pa died." Garrett looked up, vision blurring. He had failed to avenge his father, failed to protect Marian, failed to outrun his past. The crack of a gunshot echoed across the yard, but it wasn't from Reeves's weapon. The outlaw jerked backward, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the ground. Marian stood in the barn doorway, Thomas's revolver still raised. Behind her, the third outlaw lay motionless. She ran to Garrett's side, dropping to her knees beside him. "Hold on," she urged, pressing her hand against his bleeding wound. "Just hold on." "You should have hidden," he managed, his voice weak. "And you should have trusted me to fight alongside you," she countered, tears streaming down her face. The fourth outlaw had fled, apparently deciding the homestead wasn't worth his life. Marian helped Garrett to the cabin, supporting his weight as he stumbled through the door. The next hours were a blur of pain as Marian cleaned and bandaged his wound. The bullet had passed through his side without hitting anything vital, but he had lost a lot of blood. "You need to leave," he told her when he could speak clearly again. "Reeves might have friends, they could come looking for revenge." "I am not going anywhere," Marian replied firmly as she changed his bandages. "Neither are you." Fever set in that night. Garrett drifted in and out of consciousness, caught between past and present. In his delirium, he called for his father, warned of raiders, and repeatedly tried to make Marian flee to safety. Through it all, she stayed by his side, cooling his forehead with damp cloths and spooning broth between his cracked lips whenever he was lucid enough to swallow. On the third day, the fever broke. Garrett awoke to find Marian asleep in a chair beside his bed, her golden hair falling across her face and her hand still holding his. The simple sight of her filled him with an emotion so powerful it took his breath away. He had been wrong all these years. Safety wasn't found in isolation or in constant movement. It wasn't the absence of attachment or the denial of feeling. True safety, he realized, was having someone willing to stand beside you even when bullets were flying, someone who would risk everything rather than leave you to face danger alone. When Marian woke and found him watching her, the smile that lit her face told him everything he needed to know. There would be no leaving when spring came, no more running from connection. The life he had always feared was the very one he now wanted most desperately. "You stayed," he whispered, his voice rough from disuse. "Of course I stayed." Her fingers tightened around his. "This is where I belong. With a half-dead cowboy who almost got you killed. With a brave man who was willing to sacrifice himself for me." She leaned forward, brushing hair from his forehead. "A man I have come to love." The words hung in the air between them, both terrifying and wonderful. Garrett had spent years believing that love was a liability in a world as harsh as the frontier. Now he understood it was the only thing that made such a world worth living in. "I love you, Marian," he said, the admission easier than he had imagined. "I think I have since that first storm." Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Then it seems we have a decision to make." "What decision?" "Whether you will stay in the barn after you recover or move your things into the cabin permanently." Garrett laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his wound. "Is that a proposal, Mrs. Ross?" "It might be, Mr. Young," she replied, color rising in her cheeks, "though traditionally the man does the asking." "Then marry me," he said without hesitation. "Not because you need help with this place or because I need somewhere to belong. Marry me because I love you and I cannot imagine a day without you in it." "Yes," she whispered, leaning down to press her lips gently against his. 2 weeks later, when Garrett was strong enough to ride, they traveled to town together. The local preacher married them in a simple ceremony with the storekeeper and his wife as witnesses. Marian wore her best dress and carried wildflowers Garrett had picked that morning. As they rode back to the homestead, their homestead now, Garrett realized how completely his life had transformed in the months since that fateful storm. The false belief that had guided him for so many years, that attachment only led to pain, that the frontier was no place for love, had been replaced by a deeper truth. Love was the very thing that made survival meaningful. April 15th came, the anniversary of Thomas's death and the end of the year Marian had promised herself. She and Garrett stood together at the small marker she had placed for her first husband, paying their respects to the man whose dream had brought her to this place. "I think he would be pleased," she said softly as they walked back to the cabin hand in hand. "To know that his legacy continues, that the home we started together still stands." Garrett squeezed her hand. "He would be proud of you, your strength, your determination." "Our home now," she reminded him with a smile. "Our dream to continue." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Garrett felt a peace he had never known before. The young cowboy who had once believed that roots only gave a man something to lose now understood they also gave him something to fight for. "What are you thinking?" Marian asked, leaning against his shoulder. "That sometimes the greatest dangers we face are the ones we create ourselves," he replied. "I spent years running from connection because I feared losing it, never realizing that without it I had nothing worth protecting in the first place." She turned her face up to his, her blue eyes reflecting the sunset's glow. "And now I have everything," he said simply, drawing her closer, "and I am not afraid anymore." As darkness settled over the homestead, bringing with it the first stars of evening, Garrett and Marian Young remained on the porch, their futures as intertwined as their hands. What had begun with a cowboy helping a young widow during a storm had become a love strong enough to heal old wounds and brave enough to face whatever challenges the frontier might bring. Together.